Welcome to Industrial Marketing Live. I'm Erin Burish, a senior strategist at the industrial marketing agency Gorilla 76 and one of your IML hosts. Today, we're joined by our senior writer, Allen Fennewald, and fellow IML host, and also content director, James Boeckmann, to talk about knowledge extraction, which is, how to get the most out of your subject matter expert interviews. So, Alan, James, do you want to say hi, introduce yourselves?
Sure. Well, some of you probably already know me, but I'm Allen Fennewald. I'm the conversion specialist here at Gorilla 76. I've been working here for going on 4 years now. I can't believe it. And it's lovely to be able to talk SME interviews because it's one of my favorite things to get in the weeds about that we don't often get to talk about outside of the C team.
Yeah, it's good to see y'all. I'm James Boeckmann. I have been here for about 2.5 years. Yeah, excited to be here. Erin's intro was excellent. I don't need much more.
Yeah, besides slightly mispronouncing your name, I'm sorry, James. But to kind of kick off today's topic, do you want to talk a little bit about why SME or SME subject matter expert interviews are so important and kind of when you would find yourself conducting one of these?
I've never heard anyone call it a SME interview, but that makes me so happy. I can't believe that I've never said that myself because that's great. Sorry, could you repeat the question? I was too overjoyed by the word SME.
Yeah, I'm definitely not alone there. Other people call them SMEs, right? I've heard that
Is
before.
that really a thing?
I don't know. We're making it a thing if it's not.
It is now.
But when would you conduct a subject matter expert interview?
Yeah, so generally it would be when there is a subject that you need to write about that you don't have the knowledge to write about appropriately and knowledgeably in a way that your target audience is going to find legitimate and worth pursuing further. So, yeah, James, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I'd more of an amendment than an addition, but writing would be a narrow version of like what would prompt something like this, any sort of content creation across any sort of medium, video, audio, written, all of them can benefit quite a bit from a process that like relies on this type of conversation between the content creator and the subject matter expert.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. So question for the chat, because obviously we all work in the industrial industry. And how are you going about creating your technical content today, whether it's written, video, audio? Do you do subject matter expert interviews? Do you do something different to get that technical content? Drop some answers in the chat, and we'll kind of keep chugging along while we wait for those to roll in. But yeah, James, you already started answering this, like what kind of content is this used to create? And I'm glad that you pointed out that, this isn't just for written content. It's really anything you're creating that is technical. So sometimes, a podcast is going to be the best medium for your subject matter expert interviews. Maybe, your SMEs are kind of camera shy or they don't want to be, live on a podcast. Maybe written content is going to create the least amount of friction. I think that's probably the best tip. And James, Allen, jump in here, but like pick the type of content that's going to work best for your organization, your relationship with that SME.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately you can make anything with this type of process. And the reason that it's a valuable, like that I would consider it like a keystone piece in content creation, like the generative moment, is that if you're supposed to be helping your prospects or your audience like understand who you are, what makes you different, like they can start to experience, your company the right way. If they were working with you already, they'd be working with, a customer success person, or maybe they'd be working with an engineer, or maybe they'd be working with, well, like those people aren't you, but you can channel those people and get your audience in front of that type of understanding and start that type of communication and help the prospect understand that part of your business by getting the voice or the voices of the folks that, aren't in marketing somewhere. And like Aaron said, there's a real value in you being in charge of figuring out how the content like shows up to the viewer, what makes the subject matter expert comfortable. I think that there's nothing about someone who's like bad at writing that makes them bad at storytelling or bad at being compelling. It's just that they have another medium. For most people, the best medium for communication is just conversation, which is kind of why this has become sort of a cornerstone of how we work, because it's just the most applicable way to get all that is exciting to the people who make your company exciting out in front of your audience.
Yeah, and I think the other side of that coin is just what is your audience willing to consume at what stage of the funnel you're trying to target them in? What do they want to be viewing? Are they trying to look into a really deep, long document that's got a lot of technical stuff because they're pretty deep into the funnel and they're trying to prove out some things, or they barely heard about you at all, and the most likely thing that they're going to consume is a 15-second video that has a lot of exciting things for them to draw the eye?
Yeah, and we're getting lots of great tips and kind of like feedback in the chat. A couple of people are saying like Lacey has an engineering background. Who else? Emily said that, somebody on their marketing team came from engineering. So sometimes, people do have that background coming into marketing, and that's great. A couple of people mentioned, trying to do some research beforehand. And I think that's probably a good segue into the next question I'll ask. But like Jared, I think Karen, Mary mentioned that too. A lot of people say like, well, I try and do as much background research as I can. And then, come into an interview or conversation armed with that. So that's kind of a good segue. Like when you are prepping for an interview with a subject matter expert, what are some of the activities that you're doing? What's most important to prep for that conversation?
Well, you definitely don't want to be asking any questions that they've already answered online that's already publicly available. You want to be more informed than the general public on what you're already putting out to the audience as far as that technical content. And then also just what's like readily available that you can find on your own beforehand, so that the SME feels confident that you aren't wasting any of their time and that you are going to be able to deliver if they do get more technical and dig in deeper into those base details, and they don't feel like they just need to be trying to explain the basics to you the entire time, unless you really need them to, which might be the case, especially depending on, what kind of content you're trying to make and for what part of the audience.
Yeah, I mean, it's likely that you've got a good grasp on what you do know and what you don't need this other person's expertise for. A lot of times that would be like, how does this translate to the customer? But it's good to just like have yourself centered on like, what are the things that I need to leave this with? Like, what are the things that if I don't leave the conversation with this, I might want to schedule another one, which is going to be a pain. Know kind of have your goals in mind and just build, over prepare a list of questions that'll get you there. And like the understanding that Alan's talking about, gathering beforehand, is what's going to allow you to have, to deviate from that list of questions and actually find yourself talking about the most impactful stuff, making the right choices in the conversation, digging for the right details, et cetera. But, on top of that, it's just always nice to have a set of goals, prepare a list of questions that will get you there, and over prepare. In my opinion, you don't have to ask every question on your questions list. You may as well have, everything you might need. Yeah, that's all I'd say for prep.
Yeah. And so you talked about, like maybe you're creating an outline so you know what you want to achieve in the piece. You're mapping out your questions and doing background research so you know what you're trying to leave with, right? You have your strategy, you know what information, you need from this person. But maybe a more important step that we skipped is like, how do you even identify the right person to talk to for a specific piece?
You don't. You might not be right. But there was something in the chat, I believe it was Emily mentioned it, that they have someone on their team who plays the role of that expert for all the content. Across like the various clients that we've worked with at Gorilla, there's sort of like two different types of client. There's the client who has their expertise spread out throughout the organization, where we might talk with a different person every 2 weeks. And there's a client where they have one person who has worked every machine in the facility, knows everything about the company, and then finds themselves in a position of like within sales or marketing that we talk to every 2 weeks. We talk to the same person. And there's different value that comes from each of those types of relationships. In the former, you, as the marketing person, can develop like a really crazy breadth of understanding about the company really, really quickly. In the latter, you can like develop a lot of momentum. Your work feels more like it's building on itself. You can develop a really close relationship with this person that you kind of rely on to do your job. And it can make the process of creating content more rewarding, more fun, more like, a part of a friendship that you have with someone. So like those are kind of two different like outlooks on how to think about like if you're trying to set up a process like this. You could go one of two directions, or do a little bit of both. But in the end, like if you're going to just talk to one person, you need to know that they're going to be able to help you like hit all those goals that you're going to have with every single piece. It's rare that an organization who doesn't, unless you've built a position at the company and hired someone specifically to do that, which is like an amazing thing to do. Very few places do that. Very few places create a position for a subject matter expert. You might have a hard time finding someone with like that level of knowledge across every business area.
Mm-hmm. And there's different challenges for you as the writer in this particular case, I'll just say. But if you have somebody who is a marketing leader or a business leader within the company that you're always talking to, and they become kind of the brand voice, it's really easy for you to maintain that consistently, in perspective and tone and language, because you're just kind of filtering this person's knowledge and personality onto the website. But when you are doing it with a lot of different SMEs, a lot of different ways of talking about things, and sometimes even an extremely different understanding of the company and what it really is best at, then you have to filter all of those voices into your brand voice. And that can be a little more challenging than if you're just talking to the same person all the time.
Yeah, and Karen and Katerina jumped into the chat and said something really interesting that I wanted to call out is like sometimes I think that the challenge is like getting these SMEs to like give you time or like trust marketing. Like James said, it can be really valuable to like have a relationship with these people and kind of build a rapport. If you don't have that and it's really hard to like kind of get time with these people on their calendars. Karen said that, sitting in on new product launch meetings as early as possible, or like Katerina also suggested, like loving the idea of sitting in on sales calls. Like if there's even opportunities where you can just like observe conversations that are happening, like say engineering has their weekly meeting or projects has a weekly meeting to talk about, kind of what's new. Even just sitting in on that one, it shows that you're like invested, you care, you're starting to kind of like learn their language. But two, there's a lot that you could probably absorb from those conversations to learn and, build trust with those SMEs.
Yeah, it would hopefully add some strength to your request too. If you say, hey, I just need to follow up on the things I learned from this sales call or whatever it may be. Here are the specific things I need to clear up with you real quick. You're probably more likely to get a positive response from the person you're trying to contact.
Yeah. And while we're talking about prep, Mary also asked a good question about like how much time do you put into prepping for these SME knowledge extraction conversations? And James, you answered in the chat, but I wondered if you wanted to come on and kind of get that in the recording as well.
Sure. I mean, I think when I'm like, we're in a position where we're not making this content for ourselves. And sometimes, I'll be making if I was making content for a client who I met like a month and a half ago, I probably feel like really good about my level of expertise in some areas of their business just based on experience working with other clients. But in others, I might feel more like a fish out of water, and I will spend a lot more time doing the type of prep that Alan was talking about, just developing understanding about the subject. But like, if most of y'all are in-house, I have a feeling that you already feel comfortable dealing with like a lot of the subjects that you'll be talking about. So really, like, it probably resembles my process for some of my longtime clients, which is I spend a few minutes aligning myself with my own goals for the piece of content. I spend a few minutes writing out the big questions that I'm going to want to like prompt discussion with. And then I spend a few more minutes like writing out follow-ups. I probably don't spend more than 30 minutes preparing, because it's like I've already got a relationship with these people. I already understand their point of view. You probably already understand the point of view of your company. I already understand kind of what the audience is looking for. So it's something that should come really naturally once you get the tires rotating. I think that what you can start to do more is prep the person you're talking to. When you reach that level, like, are there assets that you expect you're going to want them to talk you through? Like, are there projects in mind that you want to like see a CAD walkthrough? Zoom around on the screen, show me the different pieces of this production line that we're building. That type of thing. If you're at that level where you kind of have that clear of a vision of what you want, like that's another element of prep that can take some time, is figuring out what type of assets do we have and what are we going to be able to share, so that you're not like tinkering with all of that in the moment while you have this person's time, that you figured out as much of that as possible ahead of time.
Yeah, that's really great. I think like you need to prepare yourself, but it is also really helpful to prepare your interviewee too. Let them know what to expect so they're not on the spot. I think that's a good segue. I want to switch gears and start talking about like tips for actually conducting these interviews, because if you've never, interviewed someone before, it's a skill you have to develop. And it can be especially hard when, maybe you don't have that relationship and rapport yet, and you got 30 minutes on their calendar, but maybe they're a little reluctant or they don't know what to expect. So what are some of your tips for, if the SME is unexcited or reluctant?
Yeah, I always like to try to start interviews as conversations as much as possible, and start it in a way that I would talking to anybody in a social setting, asking them how their day was and all that stuff, just the regular small talk. And I'm not afraid to spend the first 5 minutes sometimes doing that, just because it's probably going to lead to a smoother next 25 minutes if all we have is 30 minutes, for example. And also, I order the questions. My first question that we're really digging into, I'll usually make about talking about themselves, something about how they do a thing in their day-to-day life, something that will get them comfortable speaking to me, because people are just usually more comfortable talking about themselves and a personal experience than maybe talking about like a highly technical, more academic subject, which you can save for later on when they've gotten more comfortable with the setting.
Yeah, I think like if you've got questions that, like, I guess a good example would be like, does it have legal implications? Or is it a question like, how are you using AI to make employees on your team redundant? Like something that is like not easy, something that's squishy or complicated, or even like that someone might not feel good about. You're going to want to save it for the end. Like you're going to want to give this person some momentum and develop some sort of rapport and understanding over the course of the conversation. Something that I do with my clients where I speak with the same person constantly and we've developed a strong relationship is, this person's used to how I work. They're used to what I know. We kind of know where each other stand. I start my interviews with like the biggest question that I have. It'll be something like, hey, like, what are your thoughts on like China's reemergence into dairy production? Like, what are your actual thoughts? Like, I know what the market says. What do you really think? And like making that person stop and think about their point of view and lead with that to like shape how I ask everything else. I'm like, okay, can we couch this entire conversation now in your kind of starter hesitant answer to this big question? Can I spend all of my time digging into the details that build your point of view about something like this? It just gives me the most ammo right away to take the list of questions that I have and make the right decisions about what to ask and the right decisions about how to ask. And it allows me to mark like, where am I going to want more detail later? Things like that. It's kind of, sometimes it feels to the person you're interviewing like, oh my gosh, I have no momentum and I'm answering this like difficult question, but it's easy to do when it's someone that you've built rapport with over time. And who kind of knows the score, like, here's what we're going for, here's what we're trying to do. With someone who you don't have that relationship with, the way to start, one, is to let them know what the goals are, what you're aiming for. But then two, like Alan said, like, get them talking about themselves, transition that conversation about them into what they're excited about in terms of the subject matter. If you're going to be using their voice in your work, if you're going to be taking them and really putting them in front of the audience, like, you're going to want to get them excited. Even the most like reticent, hesitant, quiet subject matter expert has things that they care about. There's a reason they're doing the job that they're doing. There's reasons why they stay at your company. There's reasons why, they get out of bed and get excited about a project that's on their plate. So you can find those things and use them as the way in and the context within which the entire conversation sits.
Mm-hmm. And when you're doing that, I feel like sometimes people, when they're doing an interview, feel like, oh, okay, my job is to ask questions. That's all I'm going to do. But it's kind of alienating when you just went through a long spiel about something that you're really passionate about, for someone to just say, okay, and then go on to the next question. Like, feel free to comment. Like, that might actually spur them to elaborate further on something, or, throw your 2 cents in about it. And they might say, oh, well, you're completely wrong, but then you're going to still get more information. So yeah, I just always encourage people to not just read from their list, and try to maintain some sense of a normal flow of conversation throughout the entire thing. And that includes not sticking to your questions list in the order that they came in. Ask the next question as it most logically pertains to the end of the last answer, and then just try to make sure that you crossed them all off by the end of the interview. That's what I tend to do.
Yeah, Sharifa had a good question related to this. Like, what if you're getting really short, kind of curt answers? You're trying to build that rapport, but you're still just, maybe they're just very brief and you need more information. How do you kind of coax that out of them?
Well, that's where playing dumb maybe works. I define that no one should ever lack confidence. You don't want to come off like you're not going to do a good job for this person, but you are the humble marketer. In many cases, we aren't engineers in our background. So you just say, hey, I just need a little bit more out of you to help me understand this. This is how I'm currently viewing it. How wrong am I? And that way they have more impetus to explain to you on a base term. Sometimes I'll even say, hey, pretend I am an 8th grader, a relatively smart 8th grader. How would you explain that to me if you had to get me to understand it well enough to take a test after this? Sometimes the SMEs are more reluctant to play those kind of games than others. You got to try to read the room, I guess. But there's usually ways you can pick at them to get them to elaborate.
Alan, you're saying that rather than asking them to see you as like a relatively dumb, seasoned adult professional, you're asking them to see you as a relatively smart elementary student. Like imagine I'm an elementary student but I'm a smart one. That's worthwhile. I think that there is value in like just telling someone, like, if you don't know something, you should not pretend to know it. People will want to fill in the gaps in your understanding. Like if you're at a bar having a conversation with a friend and they sense that you don't know something, like you better believe that they're going to try and tell you everything about that. They're not going to let you live it down. Like if you want to get information out of people, you can't just be the smartest person in the room. And you should feel totally comfortable, coming in as not the expert. And yeah, like LS Hutton is saying, like, you can test something. You can say, okay, I think what I'm hearing makes me deduce X. Like, is that true? Is it true that if the avian flu kills more cows, that the cheese price will go up, or is there something else involved? And the person will tell you if something else is involved. They'll feel good that, you've acknowledged that their level of expertise is deeper than yours.
Yeah. And to Chris's point in the chat, if you're in-house, sure, you don't want to admit or feign too much ignorance, right? But that's where your prep comes in, to be able to preface things like, okay, this is what we've already said about this. This is what my understanding of this is. Hopefully that aligns well enough that the person doesn't think you're dumb, to get them to understand we're trying to explain this to our audience. You're not necessarily just explaining this to me. So can you please answer this in a way that would enlighten someone who doesn't work for this company? Like we have to keep the context of that in mind and not just make it, a personal thing about what each other should or shouldn't know.
Yeah, a question like, imagine you're talking to someone who doesn't know anything about thermodynamics. How would you explain it? And I won't say whether or not I've ever done that while actually being that person who understood nothing. But there is an element of like, playing dumb actually gets you better intel in certain spaces, especially if you want to be using direct quotes. If you're going to be using quotes from this in your content, you want to have the expertise level of your audience. You don't need to have the expertise level of someone in the back of the house. You need to be asking questions as the customer, because then the quotes are going to be for the customer. It's going to be this person answering questions to the market's level of understanding, not to, another engineer on your team's level of understanding.
Yeah. And I think sometimes when you ask the simple question, like, you can always preface it like, so I've done my research. I feel like I know the basics here, but I want to hear in your words. I think sometimes the simple question gets like interesting answers, like how that person would explain it is probably how they've explained it to your customers or your partners. And I think sometimes maybe if they assume you know too much, you're not going to get that, that wording, that phrasing that's going to be nice for your content. So it's probably a fine line. You probably got to feel it out with the person you're talking to. But I think it's probably like, when you're going to a country where they don't speak English, like if you try and make an effort, like people know, like, okay, you're here on vacation. It's not perfect. But what I've heard is like, it's most important just to make the effort. So if you try to speak their language a little bit, I think that goes a long way in these conversations.
And I've interviewed people before that were, borderline obstinate. Like when you're like a third party, I've interviewed people where it's obvious that like someone received a direct order to talk to me, which is not the context in which you really want to be. I wouldn't have, if I knew that was what was going to happen, I would have asked, like, don't force the issue here. But, when you're in that position, and someone gives you, like a 2-word answer, you can just keep asking. Like you don't even need to feign ignorance to be the second grader that asks why, how. It's just being interested. If you endlessly ask questions like why and how in response to short answers, you'll you'll make it impossible for someone not to divulge information. Like they can do it one sentence at a time. They don't need to ramble. And it's just like kind of like your job as basically a journalist, to get it out of them. It's like it should be a fun challenge when someone is having the worst day. It's like taking a table in a restaurant that has been screwed over by the host. That's the best table. You find yourself in the most amazing place if you fight through the initial obstinacy or whatever.
Yeah. One other thing that is kind of a shift here, but we should talk about is confidential information, because a lot of times when you're having these conversations, you're talking about things that might involve IP and you are the marketer. So there might be some inherent, distrust because you're going to be using this in a blog. So how do you handle subject matter expert interviews when you're potentially talking about confidential information?
Carefully.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I guess something that maybe shouldn't have been taken for granted at the beginning that we should have mentioned is like, you should always be asking for permission to record. You should always be asking permission to use, people's words in marketing materials. Like these should not be like tacit assumptions, publicity or like anything, like the public sphere in general makes some people intimidated, makes some people uncomfortable. If we show up for video shoots and have people scrambling to the cameras telling us, I can't be on video, I can't be on video, like it really does make people uncomfortable sometimes. And that's especially true when people know they're handling information that someone else at the company does not want them to share with like the public. And legal teams are like intimidating at a lot of companies, and it's just a problem you don't want to find yourself in. So I think like you just have to start by asking and letting that person, it lets that person know that like there is space for them to tell you something off the record. Like there is space for them to tell you what isn't your business to use in content. Like you need to just give the subject matter expert that space. When you're in-house and you've been somewhere a long time, you probably already have an understanding of like, okay, these are the things that I know are out of bounds. And these are the things that are on the line and situation dependent. And these are the things that are totally in bounds that we love being transparent about. There's probably lots of different types of information in those three buckets, and you probably have a pretty good grasp of them. There's a lot of intuition involved. Beyond that, it's literally just making sure the person who holds the expertise feels comfortable telling you what is and isn't proprietary, confidential, etc.
Yeah, and
and
I
what
think
is go on here.
Oh no, you go ahead, Alan.
I'll just say what is proprietary will still probably color what isn't, how you describe it, how you talk about it, how that affects the background of the company and the inner workings that still affect the customer. But yeah, go on, Aaron.
Yeah, I was just going to add, like, if it is a very sensitive topic that you're talking about, like, it never hurts to run the finished product, whether it's a video you're editing together or an article or a podcast episode. It never hurts to run that by the SME afterwards to kind of check for understanding that you haven't accidentally revealed anything you shouldn't have. I think if you're looking at like live content, something like Industrial Marketing Live, you wouldn't want to have a live webinar that maybe talks about something that could be potentially sensitive, because that's just going to make your guest really uncomfortable. I think it's about also choosing kind of the right avenue for those types of topics.
Yeah. And one thing that's important about like the proprietary confidential stuff too is like if it's not proprietary, it's not interesting. If it's not something that you own, that's about your company and what you can do that other people can't do, it is so much less interesting. There is proprietary information that is not confidential. And that's the type of discovery. It's like, what are the proprietary things that we're trying to share? What are the things that are specific to us that if only our audience knew this about us, they would come crying for work with us. Like those things aren't always confidential. So like the best, content is going to, approach that line and needs to be aware of what's confidential, because you need to be sharing the proprietary things that aren't, the things that make your company special, that you want to share with the world. Is like why you're making content in the first place. So it like something being, if someone says like, oh, well, it's part of a proprietary process, a question that I then ask is it part of a confidential process? Like, are you able to share it or no? Like, is it bound by an NDA? Is it, like what is keeping us from sharing this? And so that I know how to conduct myself in this conversation. Because you definitely shouldn't be afraid of the things that make your company unique. But it's worth being incredibly cautious around things that, you don't want to share, obviously.
Yeah, great point there. Any other tips for as you're conducting these interviews, things you've learned from doing these over the years?
On the testimonial front, I usually am trying to listen for the testimonial, right? Like I can hear a good one. I know when I hear it, and sometimes you'll get to the end of the interview and go, man, I really need a testimonial out of this. And you don't want to say, hey, I need you to make this answer better because we're going to put your words on the website. That might make them clam up. But you might just need to reiterate it, like by starting with the best point they've already made. Like you said this really good thing earlier about et cetera, et cetera. And I just wanted to dig a little bit more into that. Like, can you tell me more about, get them to take another stab at what they've already had success at and see if you can hear the testimonial that you need to get out of it, and then find ways that, you can't do it forever, but you can probably take a few stabs at it at the end of the interview if you really need to hear something.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with that. If I'm talking to like an SME that is external to my company, talking about the experience of working with my company in some way, I'm not hunting for testimonials throughout the interview. Usually they just appear. Like I'm hunting for information and details. Like I'm trying to learn. Like that is the number one reason I'm here. Every other objective is secondary or tertiary. But like I can always at the end, 2 minutes left, be like, so how would you, like, would you recommend working with us? Someone says, yeah. Then you say, how would you recommend working with us? Like, how would you recommend our product to a friend? Like, what would you tell them about it that gave you the recommendation? Mm-hmm. Like you can hunt for a testimonial really quickly at the end, but you can't get back the 10 minutes you wasted trying to get a testimonial in the middle to learn about the project that you're talking about, or to learn about the thing that you really need to learn about to write the piece, or to, build the tool on your site, or to, make a video about the project. So, I think the only other, the other pro tip of sorts that I would have is you don't need to share the whole questions list with the SME question by question. That it like gives them prep that they don't need. It's if they're searching for something like that, they're just searching for some clarity and some context about the conversation. And it's your job to make them comfortable in the prep. So, you can let them know what the goals are, let them know generally what you're going to be asking about, obviously let them know if you need them to bring anything, but like you should be giving them as little prep as possible. And they should be as unprepared as they can still be comfortable. Like you're talking to a person, you're trying to have a human conversation. And when you walk into an SME interview and you find out that someone has prepped them, you can tell you do not get the same amount of value. You know, they can be useful provided you're not trying to make content that is like very immediate and human and conversational, and one-to-one. They can still obviously be useful, but you really hurt your ability to like get quotes, to get the voice right, etc. if send every question to the person that you're interviewing, 5 days ahead of time.
Yeah. And one other quick tip is that I like to try to ask similar questions at the beginning and the end. So like if it's a product that we're about ready to write about, let's say, or promote, maybe you ask, what's the elevator pitch for this? And then at the end, you ask, if someone came up to you at a bar and asked you about this product, what would you tell them? And to see as the course of the interview has gone along and they've thought of more things or they've come up with better things to say, they might change that answer a little bit. Maybe you just ask the same one again, like, so yeah, about that elevator pitch, like do you have any, has it changed at all? But sometimes I like to change the setting a little bit so that they might give me a little bit different spirited answer, depending on what I feel like I'm missing.
Yeah, those are all great tips. I mean, just like anything else you learn as a marketer, like interviewing is a skill, and I'm sure James and Alan have gotten much better at it throughout their careers. I mean, they're kind of pros at this point. But yeah, I think, if you do your first interview and it's terrible, I think if you're going in with good intent, I think the relationship is the most important thing. You don't want to like completely burn bridges or screw up on. But I think as long as you're approaching these with curiosity and good intent, most of the time, like that SME is going to be, open to helping you. So we're right at 45 here. I want to take some time to wrap up. Alan, James, do you have any final thoughts about this topic as a whole? Like, if the audience were to take away like one thing, what would you want the biggest takeaway to be?
Try to have fun and make it a good conversation.
Yeah, like all the skills are really just conversation skills and making someone comfortable. I think that if you do 3 subject matter expert interviews with someone and you aren't their friend yet, like that is like it signals a kind of failure being a strong word, because this stuff is hard and they won't be perfect. You'll get better every time you self-evaluate. But yeah, you should be developing strong relationships with people by doing this. Your content will feel collaborative. So that would be like the takeaway. All of this is really just about making it a collaborative, comfortable way for people that aren't in marketing to make content for you, basically.
Yeah, love that. Well, I'll just close off with a couple of invitations, reminders. If you've been on the past couple of IMLs, we've been mentioning it, but this is your invite to join us in the Industrial Marketing Collective. This is a kind of the name we're giving to the community of industrial marketers we have here. So it's free to join. It's on a platform called circle.so. Free to join for discussions and the community, but there are some paid versions that include like 10 hours plus of course content, access to tools and templates, office hours, exclusive bonus content, things like that. The Slack channel is also still alive and well. If you're not already joining us in Slack, just drop a mention in the chat and we'll get you added to that. And then the next time we'll see you is May 16th. We'll be talking about DIY ad creative workflows. So how you can create your own ads that look and sound great without being a professional designer or a copywriter. So we'll have Alan and one of our Gorilla 76 designers, Jenny, on to kind of talk about that process. But that's all I've got. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Alan and James, for hopping on and being guests.
Always a pleasure.
For sure. Thank you all. Have a good one.